Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ghost Stories. Uh, in this episode, I'll begin with a not so scary ghost story, and then I'll move into one that's a bit freakier. So, this is back when I worked at Golden Horseshoe restaurant. Again, probably one of the most haunted places in Disneyland. And I had a morning shift there, an opening shift, and I decided to get there really early. I mean, a couple hours early, because I just love to see the park in the early morning. And I went to the restaurant, and I walked inside the Golden Horseshoe. Again, it's a few hours from opening. It's probably about almost 8 a.m. It's still in the 7 a.m. hour, and I'm just walking around the restaurant, just admiring everything, just looking at the architecture. And I smell cigar smoke. It was very distinct, the smell. It was definitely a cigar, kind of sweet, and I don't know, it just smelled like someone was in there and they just lit up a cigar and was smoking it. And I was trying to figure out where the smell was coming from, because I thought, like, maybe there's someone in the smoking area out back. So I went up to the stage, and then I went through the stage, out the back door, and there's nobody in the smoking area. And it doesn't smell like cigar smoke out there. And I come back in the restaurant, close the door, go back through the stage, and then out the front. And once again, I smell very strong cigar smoke, but it's coming from my left. And again, I'm standing on the stage. And on the left is a little booth, a little box seat, as they call it, that looks out over the stage. And that box seat is what we all called Walt's booth, because when Walt Disney was alive, he used to reserve that seat in that boxed, what do they call it? Just a box seat, I guess. And he used to reserve that all the time, so he and his family or his friends would sit in that seat. So we all call it Walt's booth anyway. And I couldn't help but feel like the scent of cigar smoke was coming from there. And I didn't quite know why, and it didn't surprise my shift lead that I smelled that or anything. It wasn't until a couple months later, I was actually reading a book called Walt Disney: An American Original by Bob Thomas. And in the book, I was reading a section where it said that one of Walt's daily habits was to go over to Golden Horseshoe early in the morning before the park opened, and he would sit in the Golden Horseshoe in his favorite booth where he used to watch the show, and he'd light up a cigar and smoke his cigar, and when he was finished, he would exit the restaurant and then go out over to the Rivers of America and look at the river right as the park opened. So I had kind of a bone-chilling feeling where I was just like, oh my gosh, like, that cigar smoke, it happened at the same time in the morning that Walt would have been there and smoked his cigar. Now, I don't really know if I believe that Walt Disney is a ghost. I mean, if there is such thing as heaven and hell, I believe that he would probably most likely be in heaven. I don't think he would be stuck here on Earth. But at the same time, I do kind of believe now that things that people used to do on a daily basis, the energy of those things that they do could be left behind. And maybe every morning, since he smoked a cigar in the Golden Horseshoe, maybe that energy is still there, repeating itself every morning. So that wasn't the first time I smelled the cigar smoke, and it certainly wasn't the last. Anyway, but so I'll move on to the next next story. So it was closing time late at night, and it was around one of the first months that I started working there. And I saw the curtains on the stage of Golden Horseshoe move, like rustle, like someone was walking through there. And my shift lead and her cast members were actually out back counting out. So they were in a different building. And I was left alone to stack the chairs and close up the restaurant, mop, all that stuff. Anyway, the point is that I went up to the stage to see who was up there. And I went behind the curtain and I didn't see anybody. And the stage is dark and there's no one there. And I went out the back door to see if someone had just walked through, but you know, it's late at night. Everyone's going home, either that or they're finishing up work. So there's no one in the smoking section out back. And behind me, where the stage area is, I heard pitter patter of like running, like someone was kind of just running around the stage. And so I closed the back door and I walked around the back areas of the stage just to see if I could see anybody, but I didn't see anybody. I heard giggling. And again, I saw the main curtain rustle, like someone pushed it aside and ran through it. And I kept hearing giggling. It was distant. And I thought, okay, maybe the giggling is coming from out front of the restaurant. Maybe there's some guests out there. So I quickly walked over to the front of the restaurant, out the front doors, and there's no one there. I mean, the park is pretty much closed. Everyone's on Main Street. There's no one in Frontierland. And I just continued to see the curtains on the stage rustling. So that was a kind of a creepy experience, because that's when I started to realize there was someone else there, but they may not have been human. And I'd say a couple weeks to a couple months later, I don't know, my timing's kind of messed up because it's been so many years, but I was teaching another one of my coworkers how to close up the restaurant. And the restaurant was had just closed, but the last guests of the restaurant were still inside eating their meal. And so I brought my coworker Stephanie up to the second floor, and I was talking to her about, you know, stacking all the chairs and things like that. And there was one last set of guests sitting at the balcony, kind of overlooking the restaurant. And it was a man and a woman and their two kids, a brown-haired little boy and a blonde-haired little girl. And so I was telling my coworker how to close the restaurant, and then I kind of happened to mention that the restaurant's kind of haunted, you know, and I told her about, you know, my experiences with Freddie, and even of the stage where I heard giggling and pitter-patter of running on the stage. And she was real creeped out, and I told her, yeah, it gets a little freaky here at night. Just then, the little girl who was sitting with her family walked over to us, and she asked us, she says, "Is this restaurant haunted?" And I thought, oh no, she must have overheard us talking about the ghosts, and I thought, I need to tell her no. So I looked at her, I'm like, oh no, honey, you know, it's not haunted. Why would you think that, you know? And she looked at us and she just said, "'Cause I just saw a ghost." And we were so surprised. We didn't know what to say. And the little girl just turned around and went back to her family and sat down. I don't even think that the parents even noticed that she got up and left the table. But my coworker was really freaked out. She said, "Oh my gosh, like, even this little girl saw a ghost," you know. So anyway, later on, a couple minutes later, we're downstairs, we're saying goodbye to the last guests of the night, and the family that we saw upstairs comes down, and they're going out the front door with their little boy, but their little girl wasn't with them. And so I looked at him and I said, "Oh, where's your daughter?" And they turned around and they said, "We don't have a daughter." And my coworker and I, we just looked at each other, and we were so surprised, and we said, "Okay, well, you know, good night," you know, and they left. And we realized that the little girl that we saw was a ghost. It had to be. She was sitting with her family the whole time, but, you know, uh, in afterthought, we realized that the family never really seemed to notice the little girl sitting with them, didn't notice that she left the table to come talk to us, didn't notice that she came back. I don't even think she had a plate of food in front of her. And so, looking back, it was really creepy. And so we went to the shift lead and we're like, oh my gosh, like we think we just saw a ghost or something. And we're like, oh my, it was a little girl. And the shift lead said, was she blonde? And we said, yes, she was blonde. How did you know that? And the shift lead said, well, the restaurant's haunted by a little girl. She's usually very playful, and usually you hear her running around on stage, moving the curtains and giggling. And I looked at my coworker and my shift lead, and I said, that happened to me the other day. I always hear like this pitter patter of running feet on the stage, and once in a while I see the curtains moving. And I said, oh my gosh, like that must have been the little girl, and we saw her today. And so overall, it was a really creepy feeling to think that was my first interaction with a ghost. I mean, I've seen stuff happen, weird things happen, but the girl was solid in front of us, like a real person, but come to think of it, the circumstances surrounding her, her visit there in the restaurant didn't seem to match up. Again, she didn't have a plate of food in front of her, her family didn't notice her, and the family even said they didn't have a daughter. So it was really weird, really creepy. That'll do it for this episode. Join me next week when I talk about something a little bit scarier. Again, my stories will intensify as we get closer to Halloween. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, please email me at disneylandhistorytoday@gmail.com. And please check me out on MatterhornMatt's channel. He has a Monday podcast called Matterhorn Mondays, and I'm featured on there almost every week, and we talk about really amazing conversations. This past week was about Walt's original idea of Epcot. So anyway, find me there. I'll put links in the description below. Thank you again for watching, and have a magical day.